Get ready to discover one of the darkest and most impactful stories in the Bible, the horror of Judges 19. This account reveals one of the most tragic and frightening moments in the Old Testament, where the people of Israel were plunged into chaos and distance from God. Throughout this video, you will discover details you may never have heard and reflect on how much this story can still teach us today. Before we continue, I ask you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This is very important because by supporting the video, you help bring this message to more people. Furthermore, by following every detail of this narrative, you will understand how it reveals the consequences of a world without divine guidance. In addition to delving deeper into the powerful lessons we can extract from this tragedy, stay tuned until the end, because the story of Judges 19 is not just an account of violence. It carries a transformative message about justice, compassion, and the importance of living according to God's principles. You won't want to miss any part of this video, as it is essential to understand the entire context to understand the impact of the story and the lessons that can change the way we see our role in the world. Now, without further delay, let's dive together into this surprising story full of deep reflections. Get ready, because what's coming is something that will shake you. The story of Judges 19 is one of the darkest and most tragic accounts in the Bible. It narrates a period in which the people of Israel were far from God, and each lived according to their own criteria, without clear spiritual leadership. The chapter recounts the brutality suffered by a concubine and the devastating consequences of this act, which plunged the nation into chaos and violence. This episode, although difficult to read, offers us a deep and valuable reflection on what happens when a society turns away from God and neglects His guidance. The distancing from God portrayed in Judges 19 was not an isolated event. During this time, Israel had no kings, prophets, or spiritual leaders to guide them firmly in the ways of the Lord. As a result, justice, love, and peace gradually disappeared, replaced by violence, selfishness, and a lack of compassion. The episode of the raped concubine is the culmination of this moral disintegration, a clear sign of the tragic consequences when people follow their own paths, ignoring divine principles. This narrative reminds us that distance from God inevitably results in pain and ruin. When people turn away from His wisdom and love, they lose their sense of direction and are easily led into destructive attitudes. Without the presence of God to guide and illuminate its paths, society falls into a cycle of injustice, violence, and suffering. Just like Israel then, we often find ourselves today living in times of disorder and confusion, when the absence of divine principles is deeply felt. But as tragic as the story of Judges 19 is, it also carries a redemptive lesson. She shows us what can happen when God is left aside, but she also challenges us to reflect on the importance of returning to His presence. When we allow God to guide our hearts, our families, our communities, He restores order, peace, and justice. Even in the darkest moments, God is able to bring light and healing. This story also invites us to cry out to God in the midst of crises. When we face chaos in our lives or in society, we need to remember that the solution begins with a return to divine guidance. We cannot be content to follow our own paths and expect positive results. We need to recognize that, like Israel, we also lack solid spiritual leadership, which can guide us through difficulties and help us live according to God's precepts. Ultimately, Judges 19 is a warning about the consequences of detachment from God and an invitation to restoration. He challenges us to reevaluate our priorities, to seek God's direction in all areas of our lives, and not to allow darkness to take over. Pain and ruin can be avoided when we put God at the center of our decisions and cry out for His presence. Even in the darkest hours, God is ready to bring redemption and healing. All we need to do is turn to Him and allow His light to shine in our lives. The story of Judges 19 is not just a tragedy recorded in the pages of Scripture, but a profound call to reflect on our responsibility to restore justice and goodness in a world marked by sin and injustice. This chapter of the Bible reveals the devastating consequences of a society that has strayed from God's ways. where rampant sin and a lack of compassion have led to unprecedented tragedy. Yet even in the midst of this darkness, we are reminded that God is not pleased with violence, injustice, and wickedness, and that He calls us to be instruments of His peace, justice, and restoration. The narrative of Judges 19, harsh as it is, challenges us to look at the world around us with fresh eyes. It makes us realize that there are many areas where we are called to act as agents of transformation, just as injustice reigned at that time. Today, we can also see the presence of suffering, oppression, and evil in various parts of our society. We are called to not only recognize these realities, but to act with compassion, love, and integrity, restoring goodness and justice wherever there is darkness. The Bible, from its first pages to the end, teaches that God is always working towards justice and restoration, even when evil seems to prevail. The story of Judges 19 challenges us to trust that no matter how dark the situation may seem, God has the power to redeem even the most hopeless scenarios. Our mission as Christians is to bring the light of Christ to dark situations, knowing that He can transform any reality, no matter how chaotic it may be. The call of Judges 19 is clear. We must commit ourselves to the cause of justice and goodness. We are challenged to be those who restore what is broken, who bring comfort to the afflicted, and who face evil with the strength of divine love. When we reflect on the consequences of moving away from God, we realize how vital it is to maintain our connection with Him, as it is through this connection that we can be agents of transformation and redemption. The message of this story, as difficult as it is a message of hope. It points us to God's power to transform pain and chaos into opportunities for redemption and renewal. Even in the darkest situations, we are called to remember that God is always working for justice. It is up to us to answer this call, restoring kindness and peace to a world that needs it so much.